Mysteries await just a page away. Ready to dive in? Welcome to The Book Reader, where stories unfold one enchanting page at a time. Subscribe now and unlock the magic.
The Girl Who Kicked the Hornet's Nest, Stieg Larsson.
Part 4. Rebooting System. July 1st to October 7th. Despite the rich variety of Amazon legends from ancient Greece, South America, Africa, and elsewhere, there is only one historically documented example of female warriors. This is the women's army that existed among the Fawn of Dahomey in West Africa, now Benin. These female warriors have never been mentioned in the published military histories. No romanticized films have been made about them, and today they exist as no more than footnotes to history. Only one scholarly work has been written about these women, Amazons of Black Sparta by Stanley B. Ilpern, C. Hurst and Company, London, 1998, and yet they made up a force that was the equal of every contemporary body of male elite soldiers from among the colonial powers. It is not clear exactly when Fawn's female army was founded, but some sources dated to the 1600s. It was originally a royal guard, but it developed into a military collective of 6,000 soldiers with a semi-divine status. They were not merely window dressing. For almost 200 years they constituted the vanguard of the Fawn against European colonizers. They were feared by the French forces, who lost several battles against them. This army of women was not defeated until 1892, when France sent troops with artillery, the Foreign Legion, a marine infantry regiment, and cavalry. It is not known how many of these female warriors fell in battle. For many years survivors continued to wage guerrilla warfare, and veterans of the army were interviewed and photographed as late as the 1940s. Chapter 23. Friday, July 1st to Sunday, July 10th. 2 weeks before the trial of Lisbeth Salander began, Mom finished the layout of the 352-page book tersely titled The Section. The cover was blue with yellow type. Mom had positioned 7 postage stamp-sized black and white images of Swedish prime ministers along the bottom. Superimposed over them hovered a photograph of Zalachenko. He had used Zalachenko's passport photograph as an illustration, increasing the contrast so that only the darkest areas stood out, like a shadow across the whole cover. It was not a particularly sophisticated design, but it was effective. Blomkvist, Cortez, and Eriksson were named as the authors. It was 5 o'clock in the morning and he had been working all night. He felt slightly sick and badly wanted to go home and sleep. Eriksson had sat up with him doing final corrections page by page as Mom oaked them and printed them out. By now she was asleep on the sofa. Mom put the entire text plus illustrations into a folder. He started up the Toast program and burned 2 CDs. One he put in the safe. The other was collected by a sleepy Blomkvist just before 7 o'clock. "Go and get some rest," Blomkvist said. "I'm on my way." They left Eriksson asleep and turned on the door alarm. Cortez would be in at 8 o'clock to take over. Blomkvist walked to Lundagaten, where he again borrowed Salander's abandoned Honda without permission. He drove to Hallvigs Reklam, the printers near the railway tracks in Morgongava, west of Uppsala. This was a job he would not entrust to the mail. He drove slowly, refusing to acknowledge the stress he felt, and then waited until the printers had checked that they could read the CD. He made sure that the book would indeed be ready to distribute on the first day of the trial. The problem was not the printing but the binding, which could take time. But Jan Coben, Hallvigs's manager, promised to deliver at least 500 copies of the first printing of 10,000 by that day. Finally, Blomkvist made sure that everyone understood the need for the greatest secrecy, although this reminder was probably unnecessary. 2 years earlier Hallvigs had printed Blomkvist's book about Hans Erik Wennerström under very similar circumstances. Blomkvist drove back to Stockholm in no particular hurry. He parked outside Bellmansgaten 1 and went to his apartment to pack a change of clothes and toiletries. He drove to Stavsnäs Wharf in Värmdö, where he parked the Honda and took the ferry out to Sandhamn. It was the first time since Christmas that he had been to the cabin. He unfastened the window shutters to let in the air and drank a ramlosa. As always, when a job was finished and at the printer, and nothing could be changed, he felt empty. He spent an hour sweeping and dusting, scouring the shower tray, switching on the fridge, checking the water pipes, and changing the bedding up in the sleeping loft. He went to the grocery and bought everything he would need for the weekend. Then he started up the coffee maker and sat outside on the veranda, smoking a cigarette and not thinking about anything in particular. Just before 5 o'clock he went down to the steamboat wharf and met Figueroa. "I thought you said you couldn't take time off," he said, kissing her on the cheek. "That's what I thought too. But I told Edclinth I've been working every waking minute for the past few weeks and I'm starting to burn out. I said I needed 2 days off to recharge my batteries." "In Sandham?" "I didn't tell him where I was going," she said with a smile. Figueroa ferreted around in Blomqvist's 270-square-foot cabin. She subjected the kitchen area, the bathroom, and the loft to a critical inspection before she nodded in approval. She washed and changed into a thin summer dress while Blomqvist cooked lamb chops in red wine sauce and set the table on the veranda. They ate in silence as they watched the parade of sailboats on their way to or from the marina. They shared the rest of the bottle of wine. "It's a wonderful cabin. Is this where you bring all your girlfriends?" Figueroa said. "Just the important ones." "Has Erica Berger been here?" "Many times." "And Salander?" "She stayed here for a few weeks when I was writing the book about Wennerstrom. And we spent Christmas here 2 years ago." "So both Berger and Salander are important in your life?" "Erica is my best friend. We've been friends for 25 years. Lisbeth is a whole different story. She's certainly unique, and she's the most antisocial person I've ever known. You could say that she made a big impression on me when we first met. I like her. She's a friend." "You don't feel sorry for her?" "No. She has herself to blame for a lot of the crap that's happened to her. But I do feel enormous sympathy for and solidarity with her." "But you aren't in love either with her or with Berger." He shrugged. Figueroa watched an Amigo 23 coming in late with its navigation lights glowing as it chugged past a motorboat on the way to the marina. "If love is liking someone an awful lot, then I suppose I'm in love with several people," Blomqvist said. "And now with me?" Blomqvist nodded. Figueroa frowned and looked at him. "Does it bother you? That you've brought other women here?" "No. But it does bother me that I don't really know what's happening between us. And I don't think I can have a relationship with a man who screws around whenever he feels like it. I'm not going to apologize for the way I've led my life. And I guess that in some way I'm falling for you because you are who you are. It's easy to sleep with you because there's no bullshit and you make me feel safe. But this all started because I gave in to a crazy impulse. It doesn't happen very often, and I hadn't planned it. And now we've gotten to the stage where I've become just another one of the girls you invite out here." They sat in silence for a moment. "You didn't have to come." "Yes, I did." "Oh, Michael? I know. I'm unhappy. I don't want to fall in love with you. It'll hurt far too much when it's over. Listen, I've had this cabin for 25 years, since my father died and my mother moved back to Norland. My sister got our apartment and I got the cabin. Apart from some casual acquaintances in the early years, there are 5 women who have been here before you. Erica, Lisbeth, my ex-wife, who I was with in the 80s. A woman I was in a serious relationship with in the late 90s. And someone I met 2 years ago, whom I still see occasionally. It's sort of special circumstances. Ellipsis quote. I bet it is. I keep this cabin so that I can get away from the city and have some quiet time. I'm mostly here on my own. I read books, I write, and I relax and sit on the wharf and look at the boats. It's not a secret love nest. He stood up to get the bottle of wine he had put in the shade. I won't make any promises. My marriage broke up because Erica and I couldn't keep away from each other, he said, and then he added in English, been there, done that, got the t-shirt. He filled their glasses. But you're the most interesting person I've met in a long time. It's as if our relationship took off at full speed from a standing start. I think I fell for you the moment you picked me up outside my apartment. The few times I've slept at my place since then, I've woken up in the middle of the night needing you. I don't know if I want a steady relationship, but I'm terrified of losing you. He looked at her. So what do you think we should do? Let's think about things, Figueroa said. I'm really attracted to you too. This is starting to get serious, Blomkvist said. She suddenly felt a great sadness. They did not say much for a long time. When it got dark, they cleared the table, went inside, and closed the door. On the Friday before the week of the trial, Blomkvist stopped at the Pressbyrån newsstand at Slussen and read the headlines for the morning papers. Svenska Morgan-Postens CEO and chairman of the board, Magnus Bergzio, had capitulated and tendered his resignation. Blomkvist bought the papers and walked to Java on Hornsgaden to have a late breakfast. Bergzio cited family reasons as the explanation for his unexpected resignation. He would not comment on claims that Berger had also resigned after he ordered her to cover up a story about his involvement in the wholesale enterprise Vitavara Inc. But in a sidebar, it was reported that the chair of Svenskt Näringsliv, the Confederation of Swedish Enterprise, had decided to set up an ethics committee to investigate the dealings of Swedish companies with businesses in Southeast Asia known to exploit child labor. Blomkvist burst out laughing, and then he folded the morning papers and flipped open his Ericsson to call the woman who hosted She on TV4, who was in the middle of a lunchtime sandwich. Hello, darling, Blomkvist said. I'm assuming you'd still like dinner sometime. Hi, Michael, she said, laughing. Sorry, but you couldn't be further from my type. Still, how about coming out with me this evening to discuss a job? What do you have going? Erika Berger made a deal with you 2 years ago about the Wennerström affair. I want to make a similar deal that will work just as well. I'm all ears. I can't tell you about it until we've agreed on the terms. I have a story in the works. We're going to publish a book and a themed issue of the magazine, and it's going to be huge. I'm offering you an exclusive look at all the material, provided you don't leak anything before we publish. This time the publication is extra complicated because it has to happen on a specific day. How big is the story? Bigger than Wennerström, Blomkvist said. Are you interested? Are you serious? Where shall we meet? How about Samir's cauldron? Erika's going to sit in on the meeting. What's going on with her? Is she back at Millennium now that she's been thrown out of SMP? She didn't get thrown out. She resigned because of differences of opinion with Magnus Bergzio. He seems to be a real creep. You're not wrong there, Blomkvist said. Clinton was listening to Verdi through his earphones. Music was pretty much the only thing left in life that could take him away from dialysis machines and the growing pain in the small of his back. He did not hum to the music. He closed his eyes and followed the notes with his right hand, which hovered and seemed to have a life of its own alongside his disintegrating body. That is how it goes. We are born. We live. We grow old. We die. He had played his part. All that remained was the disintegration. He felt strangely satisfied with life. He was playing for his friend Evert Gullberg. It was Saturday, July 9th. Only 4 days until the trial, and the section could set about putting this whole wretched story behind them. He had gotten the message that morning. Gullberg had been tougher than almost anyone he had known. When you fire a 9mm full metal jacketed bullet into your own temple, you expect to die. Yet it was 3 months before Gullberg's body gave up at last. That was probably due as much to chance as to the stubbornness with which the doctors had waged the battle for Gullberg's life. And it was the cancer, not the bullet, that had finally determined his end. Gullberg's death had been painful, and that saddened Clinton. Although incapable of communicating with the outside world, he had at times been in a semi-conscious state, smiling when the hospital staff stroked his cheek or grunting when he seemed to be in pain. Sometimes he had tried to form words and even sentences, but nobody was able to understand anything he said. He had no family, and none of his friends came to his sickbed. His last contact with life was an Eritrean night nurse by the name of Sarah Katama, who kept watch at his bedside and held his hand as he died. Clinton realized that he would soon be following his former comrade in arms. No doubt about that. The likelihood of his surviving a transplant operation decreased each day. His liver and intestinal functions appeared to have declined at each examination. He hoped to live past Christmas. Yet he was content. He felt an almost spiritual, giddy satisfaction that his final days had involved such a sudden and surprising return to service. It was a boon he could not have anticipated. The last notes of Verdi faded away just as somebody opened the door to the small room in which he was resting at the section's headquarters on Artillerygaten. Clinton opened his eyes. It was Wadensjö. He had come to the conclusion that Wadensjö was a deadweight. He was entirely unsuitable as director of the most important vanguard of Swedish national defense. He could not conceive how he and von Rödinger could ever have made such a fundamental miscalculation as to imagine that Wadensjö was the appropriate successor. Wadensjö was a warrior who needed a fair wind. In a crisis he was feeble and incapable of making a decision. A timid encumbrance lacking steel in his backbone who would most likely have remained in paralysis, incapable of action, and let the section go under. It was this simple. Some had it. Others would always falter when it came to the crunch. You wanted a word? Sit down, Clinton said. Wadensjö sat. I'm at a stage in my life when I can no longer waste time. I'll get straight to the point. When all this is over, I want you to resign from the management of the section. You do? Clinton tempered his tone. You're a good man, Wadensjö. But unfortunately you were completely unsuited to succeed Gullberg. You should not have been given that responsibility. Von Rödinger and I were at fault when we failed to deal properly with the succession after I got sick. You've never liked me. You're wrong about that. You were an excellent administrator when von Rödinger and I were in charge of the section. We would have been helpless without you, and I have great admiration for your patriotism. It's your inability to make decisions that lets you down. Wadensjö smiled bitterly. After this, I don't know if I even want to stay in the section. Now that Gullberg and von Rödinger are gone, I've had to make the crucial decisions myself, Clinton said. And you've obstructed every decision I've made during the past few months. And I maintain that the decisions you've made are absurd. It's going to end in disaster. That's possible. But your indecision would have guaranteed our collapse. Now at least we have a chance, and our plan seems to be working. Millennium doesn't know which way to turn. They may suspect that we're somewhere out here, but they lack documentation, and they have no way of finding it, or us. And we know at least as much as they do. Wadensjö looked out the window and across the rooftops. The only thing we still have to do is to get rid of Zalachenko's daughter, Clinton said. If anyone starts digging around in her past and listening to what she has to say, there's no knowing what might happen. But the trial starts in a few days, and then it'll be over. This time we have to bury her so deep that she'll never come back to haunt us. Wadensjö shook his head. I don't understand your attitude, Clinton said. I can see that. You're 68 years old. You're dying. Your decisions are not rational, and yet you seem to have bewitched Nystrom and Sandberg. They obey you as if you were God the Father. I am God the Father in everything that has to do with the section. We're working according to a plan. Our decision to act has given the section a chance. And it is with the utmost conviction that I say that the section will never find itself in such an exposed position again. When all this is over, we're going to implement a complete overhaul of our activities. I see. Nystrom will be the new director. He's really too old, but he's the only choice we have, and he's promised to stay on for 6 years at least. Sandberg is too young and, as a direct result of your management policies, too inexperienced. He should have been fully trained by now. Clinton, don't you see what you've done? You've murdered a man. Bjork worked for the section for 35 years, and you ordered his death. Do you not understand? You know quite well that it was necessary. He betrayed us, and he would never have withstood the pressure when the police closed in. Wadensju stood up. I'm not finished. Then we'll have to continue later. I have a job to do while you lie here fantasizing that you're the Almighty. If you're so morally indignant, why don't you go to Bublansky and confess your crimes? Believe me, I've considered it. But whatever you may think, I'm doing everything in my power to protect the section. He opened the door and met Nystrom and Sandberg on their way in. Hello, Frederick, Nystrom said. We have to talk. Wadensju was just leaving. Nystrom waited until the door had closed. Frederick, I'm seriously worried. What's going on? Sandberg and I have been thinking. Things are happening that we don't understand. This morning Salander's lawyer lodged her autobiographical statement with the prosecutor. What? Inspector Fast scrutinized Advocate Giannini as Ekstrom poured coffee from a thermos carafe. The document Ekstrom had been handed when he arrived at work that morning had taken both of them by surprise. He and Fast had read the 40 pages of Salander's story and discussed the extraordinary document at length. Finally, he felt compelled to ask Giannini to come in for an informal chat. They were sitting at the small conference table in Ekstrom's office. Thank you for agreeing to come in, Ekstrom said. I have read this account that arrived this morning, and there are a few matters I'd like to clarify. I'll do what I can to help, Giannini said. I don't know exactly where to start. Let me say from the outset that both Inspector Fast and I are profoundly astonished. Indeed? I'm trying to understand what your objective is. How do you mean? This autobiography, or whatever you want to call it, what's the point of it? The point is perfectly clear. My client wants to set down her version of what has happened to her. Ekstrom gave a good-natured laugh. He stroked his goatee, an oft-repeated gesture that was beginning to irritate Giannini. Yes, but your client has had several months to explain herself. She hasn't said a word in all her interviews with Fast. As far as I know, there is no law that forces my client to talk only when it suits Inspector Fast. No, but I mean, Salander's trial will begin in 4 days' time, and at the 11th hour she comes up with this. To tell the truth, I feel a responsibility here which is beyond my duties as prosecutor. You do? I do not wish to sound at all offensive. That is not my intention. But we have a procedure for trials in this country. You, Fru Giannini, are a lawyer specializing in women's rights, and you have never before represented a client in a criminal case. I did not charge Lisbeth Salander because she is a woman, but on a charge of aggravated assault and attempted murder. Even you, I believe, must have realized that she suffers from a serious mental illness and needs the protection and assistance of the state. You're afraid that I won't be able to provide Lisbeth Salander with an adequate defense, Giannini said in a friendly tone. I do not wish to be judgmental, Ekstrom said, and I don't question your competence. I'm simply making the point that you lack experience. I do understand, and I completely agree with you. I am woefully inexperienced when it comes to criminal cases. And yet you have all along refused the help that has been offered by lawyers with considerably more experience. At the express wish of my client, Lisbeth Salander wants me to be her lawyer, and accordingly, I will be representing her in court. She gave him a polite smile. Very well, but I do wonder whether in all seriousness you intend to offer this statement to the court. Of course. It's her story. Ekstrom and Fast glanced at each other. Fast raised his eyebrows. He could not see what Ekstrom was fussing about. If Giannini did not understand that she was on her way to sinking her client, then that certainly was not the prosecutor's fault. All they needed to do was to say thank you, accept the document, and put the issue aside. As far as he was concerned, Salander was off her rocker. He had employed all his skills to persuade her to tell them, at the very least, where she lived. But in interview after interview that damn girl had just sat there, silent as a stone, staring at the wall behind him. She had refused the cigarettes he offered, and had never so much as accepted a coffee or a cold drink. Nor had she registered the least reaction when he pleaded with her, or when he raised his voice in moments of extreme annoyance. Fast had never conducted a more frustrating set of interviews. Fru Giannini, Ekstrom said at last, I believe that your client ought to be spared this trial. She is not well. I have a psychiatric report from a highly qualified doctor to fall back on. She should be given the psychiatric care that for so many years she has badly needed. I take it that you will be presenting this recommendation to the district court. That's exactly what I'll be doing. It's not my business to tell you how to conduct her defense. But if this is the line you seriously intend to take, then the situation is, quite frankly, absurd. This statement contains wild and unsubstantiated accusations against a number of people, in particular against her guardian, Advocate Bierman, and Dr. Peter Teleborian. I hope you do not in all seriousness believe that the court will accept an account that casts suspicion on Dr. Teleborian without offering a single shred of evidence. This document is going to be the final nail in your client's coffin, if you'll pardon the metaphor. I hear what you're saying. In the course of the trial you may claim that she is not ill and request a supplementary psychiatric assessment, and then the matter can be submitted to the medical board. But to be honest, her statement leaves me in very little doubt that every other forensic psychiatrist will come to the same conclusion as Dr. Teleborian. Its very existence confirms all documentary evidence that she is a paranoid schizophrenic. Giannini smiled politely. There is an alternative view, she said. What's that? That her account is in every detail true and that the court will elect to believe it. Ekstrom looked bewildered by the notion. Then he smiled and stroked his goatee. Clinton was sitting at the little side table by the window in his office. He listened attentively to Nystrom and Sandberg. His face was furrowed, but his peppercorn eyes were focused and alert. We've been monitoring the telephone and email traffic of Millennium's key employees since April, Clinton said. We've confirmed that Blomqvist and Eriksson and this Cortez fellow are pretty downcast on the whole. We've read the outline version of the next issue. It seems that even Blomqvist has reversed his position and is now of the view that Salander is mentally unstable after all. There is a socially linked defense for her. He's claiming that society let her down, and that as a result it's somehow not her fault that she tried to murder her father. But that's hardly an argument. There isn't one word about the break-in at his apartment or the fact that his sister was attacked in Gobog, and there's no mention of the missing reports. He knows he can't prove anything. That is precisely the problem, Sandberg said. Blomqvist must know that someone has their eye on him. But he seems to be completely ignoring his suspicions. Forgive me, but that isn't Millennium's style. Besides, Erica Berger is back in editorial and yet this whole issue is so bland and devoid of substance that it seems like a joke. What are you saying? That it's a decoy? Sandberg nodded. The summer issue should have come out in the last week of June. According to one of Malin Eriksson's emails, it's being printed by a company in Södertälje, but when I rang them this morning, they told me they hadn't even gotten the CRC. All they'd had was a request for a quote about a month ago. Where have they printed before? Clinton said. At a place called Hallvigs in Morgongava. I called to ask how far they had gotten with the printing. I said I was calling from Millennium. The manager wouldn't tell me a thing. I thought I'd drive up there this evening and take a look. Makes sense. Georg? I've reviewed all the telephone traffic from the past week, Nystrom said. It's bizarre, but the Millennium staff never discusses anything to do with the trial or Zalachenko. Nothing at all? No. They mention it only when they're talking with someone outside Millennium. Listen to this, for instance. Blomqvist gets a call from a reporter at Aftonbladet asking whether he has any comment to make on the upcoming trial. He put a tape recorder on the table. Sorry, but I have no comment. You've been involved with the story from the start. You were the one who found Salander down in Gosseberga. And you haven't published a single word since. When do you intend to publish? When the time is right. Provided I have anything to say. Do you? Well, you can buy a copy of Millennium and see for yourself. He turned off the recorder. We didn't think about this before, but I went back and listened to bits at random. It's been like this the entire time. He hardly discusses the Zalachenko business except in the most general terms. He doesn't even discuss it with his sister, and she's Salander's lawyer. Maybe he really doesn't have anything to say. He consistently refuses to speculate about anything. He seems to live at the offices around the clock. He's hardly ever at his apartment. If he's working night and day, then he ought to have come up with something more substantial than whatever's going to be in the next issue of Millennium. And we still haven't been able to tap the phones at their offices? No, Sandberg said. There's been somebody there 24 hours a day, and that's significant, ever since we went into Blomkvist's apartment the first time. The office lights are always on, and if it's not Blomkvist, it's Cortez or Erickson, or that faggot. Krister Mom. Clinton stroked his chin and thought for a moment. Conclusions? Nystrom said. If I didn't know better, I think they were putting on an act for us. Clinton felt a cold shiver run down the back of his neck. Why hasn't this occurred to us before? We've been listening to what they've been saying, not to what they haven't been saying. We've been gratified when we've heard their confusion or noticed it in an email. Blomkvist knows damn well that someone stole copies of the 1991 Salander report from him and his sister. But what the hell is he doing about it? And they didn't report her mugging to the police? Nystrom shook his head. Giannini was present at the interviews with Salander. She's polite, but she never says anything of any weight. And Salander herself never says anything at all. But that will work in our favor. The more she keeps her mouth shut, the better. What does Ekstrom say? I saw him a couple of hours ago. He'd just been given Salander's statement. He pointed to the pages in Clinton's lap. Ekstrom is confused. It's fortunate that Salander is no good at expressing herself in writing. To an outsider, this would look like a totally insane conspiracy theory with added pornographic elements. But she still shoots very close to the mark. She describes exactly how she came to be locked up at St. Stefan's, and she claims that Zalachenko worked for Sapo and so on. She says she thinks everything is connected with a little club inside Sapo, pointing to the existence of something corresponding to the section. All in all, it's fairly accurate. But as I said, it's not plausible. Ekstrom is in a dither because this also seems to be the line of defense Giannini is going to use at the trial. Shit, Clinton said. He bowed his head and thought intently for several minutes. Finally he looked up. Jonas, drive up to Morgongava this evening and find out if anything is going on. If they're printing Millennium, I want a copy. I'll take Falun with me. Good. Georg, I want you to see Ekstrom this afternoon and take his pulse. Everything has gone smoothly until now, but I can't ignore what you two are telling me. Clinton sat in silence for a moment more. The best thing would be if there wasn't any trial, he said at last. He raised his eyes and looked at Nystrom. Nystrom nodded. Sandberg nodded. Nystrom, can you investigate our options? Sandberg and the locksmith known as Falun parked a short distance from the railway tracks and walked through Morgongava. It was 8:30 in the evening. It was too light and too early to do anything, but they wanted to reconnoiter and get a look at the place. If the building is alarmed, I'm not doing it, Falun said. It would be better to have a look through the window. If there's anything lying around, you can just chuck a rock through, jump in, grab what you need, and run like hell. That'll work, Sandberg said. If you only need one copy of the magazine, we can check the trash cans around the back. There must be overruns and test printings and things like that. Hallvig's Reklam printing factory was in a low, brick building. They approached from the south on the other side of the street. Sandberg was about to cross when Falun took hold of his elbow. "Keep going straight," he said. "What?" "Keep going straight, as if we're out for an evening stroll." They passed Hallvigs and made a tour of the neighborhood. "What was all that about?" Sandberg said. "You have to keep your eyes peeled. The place isn't just alarmed. There was a car parked alongside the building." "You mean somebody's there?" "It was a car from Milton Security. The factory is under surveillance, for Christ's sake." "Milton Security?" Clinton felt the shock hit him in the gut. "If it hadn't been for Falun, I would have walked right into their arms," Sandberg said. "There's something fishy going on," Nystrom said. "There is no rationale for a small out-of-town printer to hire Milton Security for 24-hour surveillance." Clinton's lips were pressed tight. It was after 11 o'clock and he needed to rest. "And that means Millennium really is up to something," Sandberg said. "I can see that," Clinton said. "Okay. Let's analyze the situation. What's the worst-case scenario? What could they know?" He gave Nystrom an urgent look. "It has to be the Salander report," he said. "They beefed up their security after we stole the copies. They must have guessed that they're under surveillance. The worst case is that they still have a copy of the report." But Blomqvist was at his wit's end when it went missing. "I know. But we may have been duped. We can't shut our eyes to that possibility." "We'll work on that assumption," Clinton said. "Sandberg?" "We do know what Salander's defense will be. She's going to tell the truth as she sees it. I've read this autobiography of hers. In fact, it plays right into our hands. It's full of such outrageous accusations of rape and violation of her civil rights that it will come across as the ravings of a paranoid personality." Nystrom said. "Besides, she can't prove a single one of her claims. Ekstrom will use the account against her. He'll annihilate her credibility. And Teleborian's new report is excellent. There is, of course, the possibility that Giannini will call in her own expert, who'll say that Salander isn't crazy, and the whole thing will end up before the medical board. But again, unless Salander changes tactics, she's going to refuse to talk to them too, and then they'll conclude that Teleborian is right. She's her own worst enemy." "The best thing would still be if there was no trial," Clinton said. Nystrom shook his head. "That's virtually impossible. She's in Kronoberg prison and she has no contact with other prisoners. She gets an hour's exercise each day in the little area on the roof, but we can't get to her up there. And we have no contacts among the prison staff. There may still be time. If we'd wanted to dispose of her, we should have done it when she was at Solgrenska. The likelihood that a hitman would do time is almost 100%. And where would we find a gun who'd agree to that? And on such short notice it would be impossible to arrange a suicide or an accident. I was afraid of that. And unexpected deaths have a tendency to invite questions. Okay. We'll have to see how the trial goes. In reality, nothing has changed. We've always anticipated that they would make some sort of counter move, and it seems to be this so-called autobiography. The problem is Millennium, Sandberg said. Millennium and Milton Security, Clinton said pensively. Salander has worked for Armansky, and Blomqvist once had a thing with her. Should we assume that they've joined forces? It doesn't seem unreasonable that Milton Security is watching the factory where Millennium is being printed. And it can't be a coincidence. When are they going to publish? Sandberg, you said that they're almost 2 weeks behind schedule. If we assume that Milton is keeping an eye on the printers to make sure that nobody gets hold of a copy, that means either that they're publishing something that they don't want to leak, or that the magazine has already been printed. To coincide with the opening of the trial, Sandberg said. That's the only reasonable explanation. Clinton nodded. What's going to be in the magazine? They thought for a while, until Nystrom broke the silence. In the worst case they have a copy of the 1991 report, as we said. Clinton and Sandberg had reached the same conclusion. But what can they do with it? Sandberg said. The report implicates Bjork and Teleborian. Bjork is dead. They can press hard with Teleborian, but he'll claim that he was doing a routine forensic psychiatric examination. It'll be their word against his. And what can we do if they publish the report? Nystrom said. I think we're holding the trump card, Clinton said. If there's a ruckus over the report, the focus will be on Sapo, not the section. And when reporters start asking questions, Sapo will just pull it out of the archive. And it won't be the same report, Sandberg said. Schenck has put the modified version in the archive. That is, the version Ekstrom was given to read. It was assigned a case number. So we could swiftly present a lot of disinformation to the media. We have the original, which Bierman got a hold of, and Millennium only has a copy. We could even spread information to suggest that it was Blomkvist himself who falsified the original. Good. What else could Millennium know? They can't know anything about the section. That wouldn't be possible. They'll have to focus on Sapo, and that would mean Blomkvist being cast as a conspiracy theorist. By now he's rather well known, Clinton said slowly. Since the resolution of the Wennerstrom affair, he's been taken pretty seriously. Could we somehow reduce his credibility? Sandberg said. Nystrom and Clinton exchanged glances. Clinton looked at Nystrom. Do you think you could put your hands on, let's say, 50 grams of cocaine? Maybe from the Yugos. Give it a try. And get a move on. The trial starts in 3 days. I don't get it, Sandberg said. It's a trick as old as the profession. But still extremely effective. Morgongava? Edclinth said with a frown. He was sitting in his bathrobe on his sofa at home, reading through Salander's autobiography for the 3rd time, when Figueroa called. Since it was after midnight, he assumed that something was up. Morgongava, Figueroa repeated. Sandberg and Lars Falson were there at 8:30 this evening. They were tailed by Inspector Anderson from Bublansky's gang, and we had a radio transmitter planted in Sandberg's car. They parked near the old railway station, walked around for a while, and then returned to the car and drove back to Stockholm. I see. Did they meet anyone, or? No. That was the strange thing. They just got out of the car and walked around a little, then drove straight back to Stockholm, Anderson told me. I see. And why are you calling me at 12:30 in the morning to tell me this? It took a little while to work it out. They walked past Hallvig's printers. I talked to Blomkvist about it. That's where Millennium's being printed. Oh, shit, Edclinth said. He saw the implications immediately. Since Falson was along, I have to suppose that they were intending to pay the printers a late-night visit, but they abandoned the expedition, Figueroa said. Why? Because Blomkvist asked Armansky to keep an eye on the factory until the magazine was distributed. They probably saw the car from Milton Security. I thought you'd want to know right away. You're right. It means that they've begun to smell a rat. Alarm bells must have gone off in their heads when they saw the car. Sandberg dropped Falson off in town and then went back to Artillerigaten. We know that Clinton is there. Nystrom arrived at about the same time. The question is, what are they going to do? The trial starts on Wednesday. Can you reach Blomkvist and urge him to double up on security at Millennium? Just in case. They already have good security. And they blew smoke rings around their tapped phones, like old pros. Blomkvist is so paranoid already that he's using diversionary tactics we could learn from. I'm happy to hear it, but call him anyway. Figueroa closed her mobile and put it on the bedside table. She looked up and studied Blomkvist as he lay naked with his head against the foot of the bed. I'm supposed to call you and tell you to beef up security at Millennium, she said. Thanks for the suggestion, he said wryly. I'm serious. If they start to smell a rat, there's a danger that they'll go and do something without thinking. They might break in. Henry's sleeping there tonight. And we have a burglar alarm that goes straight to Milton Security, 3 minutes away. He lay in silence with his eyes shut. Paranoid, he muttered.
And that marks the end of the current chapter. Thank you for listening to The Book Reader. Stay tuned for the next episode tomorrow. Please subscribe for updates.